Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic Saturday. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. I want to apologize. Normally we have music playing at the beginning, but it would appear that we had a little bit of technical difficulty. That's okay. We're here and we are live and we're ready to cover what's been happening in the world over the last 24 hours, or more or less as we did air last night and early into this morning. So today, I hope that you guys are kind of being attentive. There's been a lot of developments, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine, as well as in other places around the world. So please, if you can, check out the video description of this. So the whole point of this project is we're here to do good things. If you've never watched this before, we don't believe in profiting off of people's misery. We don't want to make a single cent off of this project because we talk about people, being injured and people going through catastrophes and crises, whether that be the war in Ukraine, you're talking about, could be the pandemics, could be uprisings in the Middle East, could be natural disasters, regardless of what it is. The whole point is to be the news that gives back, to inform you as the audience of what's happening in the world around you in a way that is a little bit more independent and gives you kind of a firsthand look at some of this stuff and with some explanation. So please, if you can, check out the video description below and check out all the different organizations we have listed down there, whether that is to support Ukraine in its endeavor to liberate its occupied territories and, give to those people that are internally displaced and refugees, or whether you're talking about the Horn of Africa, which is currently going through the worst drought in the last 40 years. So please be sure to check out that video description. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, please give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is to help us grow this channel. The more people that come here and watch this, and the more people that participate in this community, the more of an impact we will have as a community, the more of an impact you will have as a community. And so thank you very much for supporting us, but give us a like and subscribe, share this amongst your friends. You can follow and like and share our stuff on Twitter, as well as other social media platforms, which we're working on right now. And you can always jump into our Discord community too. And if you have more organizations, please send them to us. We want to be able to go through and vet these independently and make sure before we get them added onto our streams. And please keep them coming. We have several that we're vetting right now for you guys. But with that, before we jump into the stream and actually jump into the news here, ask questions. So I can answer a pretty wide variety of questions that you may have, as these situations, especially the military ones, can become quite complicated. Please feel free to ask your questions. I will be more than happy to answer them to the best of my ability. A little bit of a background on myself. I served as a corporal in the United States Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I did 2 tours to the Middle East with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. My first tour, I spent 4.5 months inside of the country of Syria, with about another month and a half in transit, both to and from the country of Syria in the country of Kuwait. I also served my second tour. I was in charge of the anti-armor operations of the crisis response company out of Kuwait, and I was also in charge of anti-armor operations out the Baghdad embassy complex during the protest on New Year's of 2020. So I was one of the 100 Marines that responded to that. And then there's a lot of stuff that and then I also trained Saudi Arabian Marines and a lot of stuff. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, partially cross-trained radio operator, and of course I'm a rifleman as well. And I could talk pretty extensively about the infantry aspect of this. Now, as for other things, I like to consider myself pretty knowledgeable in things such as history, geopolitics, and other situations going on throughout the globe, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. But if I simply cannot, I will say I can't. I can't be an expert in everything, and I always implore you, regardless of what I say, regardless of what expertise I may have, that you do your own research. Being a well-informed individual is very important, and don't believe everything that you hear from somebody on the internet. And with that, we get ready to dive right into the operations down here inside of Ukraine. And that's where we start our special report off today. So as we take a look, we jump here and into Kyiv, where of course we get our child casualty update, as miserable as that is. Every single day we seem to get a child casualty update from the Prosecutor General's Office of the nation of Ukraine. And we see that, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 399 Ukrainian children have died, and 783 children have been injured. And once again, that's coming from Prosecutor General's office. Delta Aviation says, wasn't Lyman annexed yesterday by Russia? We'll get to that. And that immediately actually does bring us over into this region, but we don't start off there with the Lyman and all of that yet, because there was something else that happened in the Kharkiv Oblast that I think kind of takes precedent onto this. And what we see is that Russian troops murdered a civilian convoy between Kupiansk and Svatov in the Kharkiv Oblast, which has been recently liberated as Ukrainian forces are pushing through across the entirety of the front. And they killed at least 20 people. Right now, I think they're up to 24, but that's not totally confirmed yet. 10 of them are children. One of them was a pregnant woman as well. This is the latest of a series of major attacks against civilians that we've seen against the Ukrainian civilians in this country by the part of the Russian forces. And so these photos are blurred to an extent, but it is still a little bit more graphic, but I think it's important to see. These are coming from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Absolutely deplorable. This is all coming from the General Staff of Ukraine. Once again, at least 20 people, and that count is reportedly rising, as including 10 children and one pregnant woman amongst them, were murdered by Russian forces along this roadway here between Kupiansk and Svatov here in the Kharkiv Oblast. But we jump down here where we have a couple of different developments. So I'm going to kind of go in order as to how we found them today and kind of how they came out. And we see that here at Chandri Holov, we see that it has been liberated. Ukrainian forces have reportedly liberated the village of Chandri Lahov and located within the Donetsk Oblast, and they continue the counteroffensive here in the east. Take a look.
Герої. О! Скидай цей флаг. Ха-ха! Ура! Давайте, скидайте. Пацани, всі плюнули по разу по ньому. Бу, блядь.
Got to make sure your boots are clean. So this pretty much almost closes off this pincer right here. We do know it seems to be almost a double pincer movement. So not only did it put pressure here on LYMAN, but we also see that because reportedly Russian forces are still here in Oskil and there's still a pocket here. So now it's a double encirclement. So there's a ton of stuff here that it seems like they're going to encircle. You can't just imagine these guys, but also here as well, unless they also pull out of these areas. That's not the only one. We also know that Stavki was also seen having Ukrainian forces that were pushing through this area today, as they are continuing this kind of encirclement. And what we end up seeing here is they were spotted through the villages of Stavki near LYMAN, and it's really putting a lot of pressure on these. Oh, it would appear that the original photo or this original video was actually deleted. Oh. So that happens occasionally, but we do know that there were forces. We had video footage of them here in Stavki, so we do have Ukrainian forces moving in this area. And of course, we also see that over here, we saw yesterday a large convoy of Russian forces that were getting ready to leave the city of LYMAN. We saw the footage of that yesterday, which we aired last night. Today, it would appear that not all of them made it. A large group of them appear to have been destroyed as they were attempting to flee from LYMAN. So it did not work out in their favor. They did not make it through their lines. I'm sure very few ended up making it back to places such as Crimea. So we'll take a look here. This is what's left of a Russian convoy as you're driving here into LYMAN. Take a look.
Что-то они не особо спешили. Нормально так прилетело. Пожитки, да? Напизженная. Я думаю, если там присматриваться, то
что там, да?
каски.
Генераторы, типа, да.
Шматья вон кучу побросали. Лазить по нем опасно.
Бумага туалетная.
Но это нормально. Вон эти видео.
And it does go on. You can see a little bit of it up here, but those are actually Russian troops which have been killed. So we do know it was a Russian convoy because there are Russian troops that are, well, in the vehicles and around the vehicles after they've been killed. But that all leads us up into LYMAN, where we see that Ukrainian forces have liberated the city of LYMAN now. We do know that it is liberated officially. We have seen Ukrainian troops inside of this town. Russian forces, they completed that encirclement movement, and they have been pulled out of this area. And those that didn't escape either surrendered or were killed. But take a look. This is the video from downtown in front of the administrative building here in LYMAN, which has been successfully captured or recaptured by Ukrainian troops and has now been liberated. Take a look.
Українці, сьогодні Збройні сили України, а саме 81-ша окрема аеромобільна десантна бригада спільно з підрозділами Національної гвардії України, батальйоном Кульчицького, звільнили та взяли під контроль населений пункт Лиман в Донецькій області. Рашисти повинні знати, що їм не буде життя на нашій землі. Слава Україні! Слава! Слава десантно-штурмовим військам Збройних сил України! Слава! 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 Давай! Все, встановлюємо прапор України.
So LYMAN has been liberated. We are seeing that they're visiting Pinchelin's office here inside of the city. Take a look.
Ебать, тут на прием к Пушилину приехали. Заебись. Мистер Лиман. Ебать.
And of course, we see burned down, we're seeing a lot of stolen stuff as well. First of all, look at all this. Look at all these destroyed vehicles. Massive amounts of destroyed equipment. Massive amounts of destroyed equipment. But we're also seeing a lot of looting once again. Just tons and tons and tons of looting. I mean, why? Well, there's no discipline in the Russian military. It's not being... Looting is actually an offense against... It's a war crime. It falls under the Geneva Conventions, the 1948 Geneva Conventions. And so these kind of things, they call it pillaging, but looting an area is a war crime, and we see an extensive amounts of it. Of course, when it comes to these war crimes, Russia's not persecuting these people. They're not prosecuting any of these guys. A lot of people have asked, is this purposeful? Are they telling their guys going out, go out here and, rape and burn and pillage and everything else? No, I do not believe that is the case. I believe that the case is that they're not being told not to do those things. See, in the military, you get given what's called rules of engagement, or ROEs. It's extremely, extremely, extremely important that you have these kind of briefs, because it can be very different depending on where you're going. My ROEs in Syria were completely different from the ROEs when we were in Baghdad. It was completely different. So what we're talking about here, they're not getting those rules of engagement. You saw some in the very beginning, like the Russian babushka or the Ukrainian babushka who went up and told the Ukrainian soldier or the Russian soldier to fill his pockets. That that is like, obviously that guy had some ROEs. That has gone out the window. These guys, they're drinking while in their field. They're not. He can't say that they aren't in the field, or that they're drinking in the field. They are pillaging, they are raping, murdering, they are leveling cities, they are, I mean, you name it, they're doing it blatantly, and they're fighting, they're fighting, trying to take more of this territory, but they're not really working out very well. So they're being not, but the point is they're not being told not to do these things. They're not being told not to go against the Geneva Conventions. They're not given left and right lateral limits. It's just go to Ukraine, fight. There's not really any guidance. There's not any persecution for committing war crimes. There's not, everybody is, it's just, there's no moral aspect to this. There's no, these are the laws of war, this is what you need to follow. There's no, this is what you can and cannot shoot at. No one is purposefully going out of their way and telling these guys about this. Over here in Yampol, we're seeing the first-person perspective from the Battle of Yampol. Yampol was declared liberated about a day and a half ago. So we do know that the Ukrainian forces did push into this area and did already clear it. But we're finally getting some footage out of here of those actual combat. Keep in mind, when you're talking about combat footage, you're talking about what's happening here on the front lines, some of this information is going to be delayed. There's this thing called operational security, or OPSEC. And a lot of information is going to be very much delayed. In some cases, it will be days of delay or weeks. Most of the time, though, most of our sources, we're getting stuff that's fairly real time. I wouldn't say completely up to date. I'm sure that LYMAN was declared, liberated hours ago, but we do know that, but we're just now getting these updates as we're talking about it tonight. And one of those examples is here. This is the actual footage from LYMAN of the combat that was going on there. Or not LYMAN, but here in Yampol. Just take a look.
Бля, уберите этого чувака, блядь. Кинь ему гранату. Тоже смешно.
Мене теж рак. Мене теж, блядь. Легкі.
Что, поехали?
Блядь.
Руку, по-моему, попал.
So reportedly, both of these Ukrainian troops were actually hit, and that's why they ended up falling off the back of that MRAP. But they are reportedly okay. They did survive that engagement, and of course, we do know that the entire village ended up getting liberated. So that is the situation when it comes to LYMAN. LYMAN appears to be secured. Should there be any more Russian forces in this pocket? We don't have enough video footage or actual, like, images to show that Russian forces are not in this pocket. So that's why a lot of this stuff isn't up to date. This is based off of assessments coming from the battlefield from multiple sources, but also off of the video evidence that we're getting here day in and day out as we're going through and doing our research. We're making this as close as possible. But keep in mind, when it comes to these battle lines and when it comes to these battle maps, it's not accurate. I'm going to be 100% honest about that. It is not accurate. These are shifting constantly. The information that you're getting from the battlefield is delayed and fragmented. So it's as best of a representation as you can get. Gives you a rough idea as to where the situation is at now. But there's probably not going to be a single person that has an actual up-to-date battle map, that you're going to find. So just as a disclaimer there, it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you a good rough idea as to the situation on the ground. Yeah, Aravis says the footage released today about dead and injured civilians in a convoy there in Kharkiv Oblast, which we had just talked about, apparently happened a couple of days ago, but the information is just now becoming released. As you jump over here, it's a Luhansk Oblast. They're making a movie that's rated S for stupid. Kid you not. So while they're not able to actually equip their troops, they're dumping a bunch of money into making a film about Ukrainian Nazis and American bioweapons. And I wish this was a joke, but it's not. So this is coming out of Luhansk Oblast. Swear to God. They're making a movie. So they can't actually give their troops food or ammunition or rifles that aren't completely rusted out and useless or equipment that's not from the 60s. But they are making a movie. It's unbelievable. So let's see here. Delta Aviation asked, how important is LYMAN? LYMAN is extremely important for this region. Now, in the grand scheme of things, LYMAN, is it as important as, say, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, or Slavyansk, or any of that? No, not really. But in immediate tactical gains, LYMAN is extremely important. LYMAN really holds down this sector of the front lines and allows for and really prevents large-scale movements across the Seversky Donets River. Which is located right here. This is the Seversky Donets. So if Russia controls LYMAN, that really puts them in decent artillery range of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, outside of, when I'm talking grad systems, like BM-21 grad systems, the DPK-30s, stuff like that. LYMAN is extremely important because it sits here on the river. It also has a rail hub in here. If you take a look, it has a rail hub which allows for an easy inflow of equipment and troops and supplies. So it's extremely important in the tactical sense for immediate gains, as opposed to strategic gains when you're talking about things like Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Mariupol is a strategic gain. These areas, Bakhmut, in generally speaking, while pretty decently large, it's not the largest area here. But Bakhmut is a strategic objective. It lies along an axis of advance for Russian forces. So it's tactically and strategically important because it allows control to a roadway that runs pretty much all the way through the Donetsk Oblast, from areas that are already occupied, giving a perfect main supply route, or MSR, for the Russian forces. That's why it's so important to take these locations. This is why Bakhmut's important, why Toretsk is important, Orlivka, Kostanivka, Seversk is important because it's a supporting effort onto their northern front, but that is currently collapsing. So we'll see how well that goes. But that's kind of what we're seeing here. Reports at this point suggest that Ukrainian forces are already in artillery range and already striking targets in Crimea. They're not engaging on foot yet, but they are definitely going to be pushing towards Crimea. For those that don't remember, Crimea was the first town captured by the Russian forces during the Donbass offensive, back when they switched over to this sector of the war. So that's going to be very it's going to be a very significant take for them, more or less morale-wise, and more or less as a symbol. But that is still going to be, because this also, I believe, has a pretty important railhead that runs through here. So we'll see how that goes. We'll continue to keep updated on that sector of the front, but there is still a ton happening. So it's been relatively quiet across the rest of the Donbass today until you get over into the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, where we see that a K-52 NATO designation Alligator was shot down today by Ukrainian forces here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. We actually have the shoot down of that vehicle. Take a look. So it does have copyright music, so I can't play that, but you can see here, that's the K-52 Alligator. The K-52 is very easy to identify, and it's very easy to identify because it has a tandem rotor. It has a tandem main rotor. It doesn't have a tail rotor. You can see there it goes up in smoke. And there's what's left of this thing. So it's very easy to identify because it has a tandem rotor design. The main rotor on the top of it, it has two blades, or has two main rotors. So instead of having a tail rotor provides anti-torque. It keeps the helicopter from just spinning around and around and around and around. The design for the K-52 means it has two main rotors that spin in opposite directions, which means that they are giving the same amount of torque, so it doesn't spin the helicopter without the use of a tail rotor. So it's very easy to identify. There's a couple helicopters that have a design like that, but the K-52 Alligator has a very distinct sound to it, as many other helicopters do. The UH-1 Huey, the Bell technically has its own distinctive sound, that chopping sound. The Osprey has a very distinctive sound, as much as I hate it. But yeah. So anyway, Ka-52 shot down. Whoop, I almost just skipped over the next point, and that's actually kind of important. Up here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, we get an update in regards to the Zaporizhzhia massacre, what ended up happening yesterday. And we see that a number of victims of the attack, quote, the number of victims on the attack on the humanitarian convoy in Zaporizhzhia on September the 30th increased to 118 people. 30 of them died, including 2 children. And that's coming from Ivan Fedorov, who's the mayor of Melitopol. So that is up from 85 as of yesterday. We're now up to 118. Casualties have not, or the deaths have not increased, however. So that is good to see. That's just wounded at this point. Hopefully they do survive, but we do know that many of them are in critical condition, including a 3-year-old girl with a shrapnel wound to her abdomen. In Enerhodar, Russian forces ended up detaining and taking the Director General of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The man in charge of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been captured by the Russians and detained. The International Atomic Energy Agency demands an explanation from the Russians in regards to the detention of the director. And of course, we're getting this from Euromaidan. Monster Greg 11 asks, any reports about the number of Russian POWs taken after LYMAN? We do not know. So when it comes to casualties, and when you're talking about casualty reports, anybody that is taken as an EPW, enemy prisoner of war, or POW, prisoner of war, you have to understand that these two countries are in an information war. And there is propaganda that does happen on both sides and minor misinformation. Ukraine appears to be very much more truthful in what it is saying. But even purposeful or not purposeful, if you went by the battlefield reports from the Iraq War of the United States forces there, you would see that American forces reported killing, commanders on the ground reported killing in their battlefield reports the Iraqi army 7 times over. So we here on the channel do not discuss military casualties in any significant way. We do not have any good numbers regarding POWs. In fact, not even for the entirety of the war at this point. There's no real good numbers regarding POWs. The Ministry of Defense and therefore the Kiev Independent actually releases a big, nice little graphic that has all these casualties every single day, and they were reporting upwards of almost 51,000, Russian are killed in action and thousands of destroyed vehicles and everything. We don't cover that, just because you're never going to know. Until this war is long over, if we ever actually know. It's just doesn't have... This war is catastrophic beyond all belief. And there's not enough accurate information. Russia is definitely... They're not releasing their full casualty counts, if any casualty numbers. They're not verifying or confirming really anything. The Ukrainians, I think, are overestimating quite significantly the number of losses that the Russians are taking. They also are not releasing any. They've released some snippets of information regarding how many casualties they've taken, but they haven't released any actual figures yet regarding that. But they minus who they say are POWs and stuff throughout the war that are in things like the filtration camp in Bezimene, for instance. Andrew Zhichenko, who is the assistant to the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, is actually releases those numbers. But there's just not enough information to talk in a good way, in a intelligent and methodical way about casualties and about POWs, because there's not enough information, there's not enough confirmation, and the truth is we will not know until this war is long over what the casualties and POWs and everything else are, if we ever know. Because it could be, they could in 50 years from now, be walking through an area and someone kicks what they think is like a stick or something while on a walk in the woods and they find a mass grave. So we just don't know. And we don't really cover that here because we don't want to misinform somebody on stuff that we really can't confirm and probably never will be able to. So I apologize if I can't answer that question, but I think it's important to talk on that topic because that's what people really care about, and no one is going to tell you accurately what it is. So be very wary of casualty numbers. Always be very wary of casualty numbers. As we move over here and into the Kherson Oblast, we see that Russian forces were spotted burying a number of containers that no one knows what's inside of them or what their purpose is. We actually have some footage here. There's a small photograph of that drone footage. But you can see these containers, they're being buried in the fields of the Kherson Oblast. No one knows what these are. Everyone's kind of wondering what is going on, what the purpose of these items are, and why they're being buried. And here is the drone footage coming from that. Take a look. JL asked, if Russia would decide to locate their nuclear missiles in annexed regions, how would it affect further course of the war, considering their nuclear policy they would be allowed to use it? Oh, we went to the question, and it wouldn't be considered as an attack and them making the first step. Oh, so we're already jumping to the big question. We're jumping to the big question. So, nuclear weapons and the annexed territories. Nuclear weapons with the annexed territories is a really, really, really highly discussed topic right now, of course. I'm sure everyone has heard everything there is to want to hear about nuclear weapons in these territories and just can't get enough of it still. So, Russia would not locate nuclear weapons inside of these territories. On a tactical level, even the highest levels of the Russian government, despite what they're saying, understand the situation on the ground and understand that in many ways their situation is not tenable. Putting them in these regions, which are currently still contested, would put their nuclear arsenal at risk. And the last thing you want to do is have loose nukes. So the Russians are definitely going to maintain some kind of control over that by keeping them inside of areas in Russia, probably deep inside of areas like Siberia. The likelihood that they launch one, a tactical nuclear weapon would likely be launched via an aircraft or by a medium-range ballistic missile, as opposed to a strategic nuclear weapon like an ICBM. They're probably going to use it with their aircraft that are capable of carrying these, such as their high-level bombers. But they're not going to put them inside of Ukraine. This area is too contested, it's too close to home, and too many factors mean that the security is not paramount or could not be considered there. And so, if anything, they would move them to the closest within a border region, such as over by Belgorod, where they already have Iskander-M missile batteries located in these areas. But once again, that also puts them within a closer retaliation distance to NATO, and you don't want NATO, should it be able to get involved, which is a potential, to be able to strike back at your nuclear arsenal, which then has to be turned against the bigger threat, which in that case would be the NATO alliance. So you're not going to see nuclear weapons inside of Ukraine. The closest you may see them is if they do move them, which according to the United States so far officially saying that they have not seen any change in the nuclear posture of the Russian Federation. So, and that's about that is probably the best assessment of the Russian military that we can get. I don't know exactly. Well, obviously, if there was something pretty big, they're not going to tell us. But from what we're seeing, it really isn't that big of a posture. There was a little bit of interesting stuff kind of ongoing up here in the northern part of Siberia, where there was some more bombers, nuclear-capable bombers that had moved up there. But that's nothing crazy, considering that we're basically in a second Cold War, and that both countries usually conduct bomber flights over here, over like the Bering Strait and over the Arctic and everything else. So it's not the craziest. It happens, and so we just have to move on and understand that it's pretty much a Cold War again. We live in a different world than when it was prior to February, and the world is continuing to change, and things are getting more heated, but not to the point that I don't think that the United States and Russia are going to go to war. I don't think that NATO and Russia will go to war here anytime soon, and I doubt that nuclear weapons are actually going to be used in Ukraine. Simply because if there's one thing in the world that people care about more, JL says, that move would be a D move, but brain dead. But we need to remember that they are not logical in any of their actions. They are logical, but it's logical for them, not logical for anybody else looking from the outside. Everyone else would be like, "This is stupid." It's just because it's bad logic doesn't mean there's not logic there, and I think that's a really, really bad thing to say. Is to say that there is no logic to it. There certainly is. It's more brash than it used to be. Maybe not as much logic, but there is logic to it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good logic. For these guys, you have to understand that moving into, because at the end of the day, what are they thinking? They're thinking the biggest threat still to Russia is NATO. They have a huge land border with NATO now, considering Finland is 2 countries away from being in NATO and is already prepared and has been a NATO ally for some time anyway. So the thing with this is that you're not going to see a likelihood of a war here, because there's one thing that people want more than to kill your opposition, and that is to maintain your power. You look at the Ayatollah in Iran, could have easily killed Americans in Al-Assad Air Base and in Erbil when they launched a bunch of ballistic missiles. That was back in 2020. They didn't. Why? Because killing Americans is the quickest way for Iran to no longer be a caliphate anymore. It's the quickest way for them not to be an Islamic republic, because the United States would have immediately bombed them into the Stone Age if they just launched a bunch of ballistic missiles at and killed a bunch of Americans when they launched those ballistic missiles at Al Asad Air Base and up in Erbil, and could have easily hit Camp Taji or could have hit the U.S. Embassy. They didn't. They hit empty sectors of the base. And then they reported on their news that they had killed a bunch of Americans. Of course, we didn't have anything, but they said a bunch of concussions, of all things, some TBIs. So we had some TBIs. That's the most. But most of the Al Asad Air Base was evacuated prior to the missiles even landing. So just because, but they could have, easily could have. They easily could have. And that's really, I think, what stops a lot of people is Russia knows, Putin knows that launching a nuclear weapon, and you have to question, considering how bad the rest of the arsenal is his nuclear arsenal as fit as it really is presented to be? Because they presented to be the second best army in the world, and that really didn't work out. So how good is their nuclear arsenal? That's the first question. Is it actually as impressive as it's foretold to be? Scary regardless because it's nukes, but is it as good as what they present it to be? There's questions of that. And two, he knows launching a nuclear weapon is the end of his power. He does not have power over his country anymore. If he ends up having a country after that. So we don't know with the retaliation. They said it would be swift and catastrophic if he used a nuclear weapon. Now they've said that about a lot of things. I love how we went from being that sanctioning SWIFT was the nuclear option to the nuclear option is the nuclear option. But that is the situation. I don't think he's willing to lose his power. He wants to stay in power more than he would like to take out his opposition. And I think that includes Ukraine. I think that includes NATO. Now, that seems like solid logic from his point of view, because I don't know about you, but I'd much rather just take the L than to get completely obliterated in nuclear hellfire, which is what you have to consider when you are considering using nuclear weapons. Is the retaliation will be a nuclear strike, and that's probably not what he wants on the Russians for his own safety, because if the nuclear strike doesn't kill him, the Russian people will, and they have a very long history of doing so. Over here, we see that more ships have left the ports of Odessa. Quote, 11 ships left the ports of Odessa region through the grain corridor. There are over 217,000 tons of agricultural products on board for countries of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And that's coming from the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine. And down here in Sevastopol, we see a very interesting incident appears to have taken place. Explosions ended up rocking the Belbek airport outside of Sevastopol, following the fact that a Russian jet failed to successfully take off and ended up careening off the end of the runway. There's no clarifying information at this point. That's what was reported by TASS. Everyone's talking about that someone smoked carelessly. No, this guy just crashed his jet. And we do have footage of the jet crash as well. So this is coming out of Belbek airport there in Sevastopol, currently being used as a Russian airbase. Someone cue the Boom Diata song from the Discovery Channel commercials. Here is coming from the Ukrainian Air Force. Here is the jet crash coming out of Sevastopol. You can actually see the aircraft. It's very blurry. It's not very good footage, but it is footage of the jet failing to take off and careening off the cliff. So when just watching this red circle, someone was nice enough to highlight this for us. Take a look. I notice Matthew Shoemaker says, I notice a lot of Russian weapon platforms try to turn themselves to base and always make a mess, whether a S-300 on a U-turn or an S-25 suddenly banking left into the ground 5 seconds after takeoff. Yeah. It's... Russian equipment is old. It's very old. It seems like it's modern equipment, but it's old. It's former Soviet in many ways. The Se-25 is very Soviet. Most of their even their ground platforms are Soviet. They're either developed in the Soviet Union or they were built right after the Soviet Union's collapse, after they were going through testing during the late parts of the Soviet Union until its collapse in 91. So it's, it's not great equipment. I mean, it's new equipment, but it's new for the 90s and the Cold War. It's not really the first rate stuff that was developed after countries continued to fight wars, in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. And while not everyone may agree with what happened in these wars, and you don't have to, what it did do is it forced the United States and coalition partners to develop technologies that made them extremely accurate in their weapon systems and what they were doing. It made them force them to improve in how they operated in these areas, because you're being forced to fight against somebody that it's very difficult to tell if they're a friend or foe. It says that when you're talking about in the insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, you're fighting against a group of individuals who dress and act like they're part of the civilian population until they want to attack you. They're doing every single means to be within the civilian population, to not be distinguished from the civilian population and look exactly like the guy who's trying to sell you stuff at the market, and it could be the guy selling stuff to you at the market. This means that they're operating heavily inside of these very, very highly populated civilian areas. It makes it very difficult if you're any of the occupation or fighting force trying to counter insurgency, but it forces the United States and coalition partners to develop very high precision munitions, very capable intelligence, because for 20 years we were trying to pick out between the two guys that look exactly the same, which one's a terrorist and which one isn't, which one's the insurgent, which one's not. It means that you have to get very good at intelligence. You have to watch these guys. You have to get very good, because these guys are both in the same bazaar. They're in this exact same market area. One of them's a terrorist. You have to make sure that you kill the terrorist and just the terrorist and not all the civilians around him. So we got very, very good at precision weaponry. We got very, very good at intelligence. And it forced us to develop new technologies to make us even more efficient, more deadly, and more accurate. For 20 years. Soviet Union and the Russians didn't. They just had to rebuild what was left of their country after the fall of the Soviet Union. They fought some insurgencies and separatist movements in areas like Grozny. They had a little escapade in South Ossetia there in Georgia when they invaded that country in 2008. They've done some minor stuff, counterinsurgency, but that's really only been going on since like 2012 in Syria. And it's mostly the Syrian National Army fighting, and while the Russians are mostly doing, advise and assist, and they're using their air force to bomb refugee camps, as we were just talking about. But really, Russia hasn't had to fight a major war. They haven't been fighting a major war until now. So most of their stuff, what they thought was good, is really very much outdated by the time that you're seeing them actually go into a combat role and actually fight a full-fledged war, because they haven't had to develop it. They thought that they had precision stuff. Precision for them is within 200 to 500 meters. That's most of their ballistic missiles. Precision for us is HIMARS systems that can put a missile within 1 meter of you. That is the difference, and that makes a huge difference on the battlefield when you're talking about the HIMARS systems and the Mars M270 Mars 2 systems inside of Ukraine. When you're talking about the AGM-88 HARM missile that's being used to hit radars. It's not as great as the newer developments of the HARM missile, but it's something that Russia really doesn't have. And their artillery systems, having high long-range artillery systems in general, whether that's the Caesar artillery guns or what have you, this stuff, while it could be used against a near-peer threat like it is now, a lot of it was developed against counterinsurgency, where you needed long range, you needed firepower, you're limited on your troops and your deployment capabilities because of politics back home, and because the war has been dragged on for so long that you have to work with what you got there on hand. And so it needs to be good, and it needs to be effective, and it needs to be wide. It needs to be wide hitting, wide coverage. So that's kind of what we're seeing, and that's kind of the drawbacks as to why Russia their equipment just doesn't work so well, because they haven't maintained it. They don't have the budget that other countries do for maintaining their military, and they haven't been fighting a war for 30 plus years at this point, and it shows. It shows. You can't go that long without watching and analyzing other people's wars and just keep going, it'll be fine. Does the Russian Minister of Defense ever tell the truth? No. Moving on to the next thing, which is we get ready to move into the international news here, and we of course start off with Moscow. Moscow was shown that the annexation parties that everyone talked about when it comes, right after the annexation announcements, look at Russia. You throw in this huge party. Doesn't necessarily mean that everything is true. Take a look. So this is them talking. So this is the propagandist there in Moscow during the party last night, talking about how they should declare this a holy war. Take a look.
Правильно это назвать священная война! Священная война! Существует такое древнерусское междометие, гойда, означающее призыв к немедленному действию. Как же нам не хватает сейчас таких боевых кличей? Гойда, братья и сестры, гойда! Бойся, старый мир, лишенный истинной красоты, истинной веры, истинной мудрости, управляемой безумцами, извращенцами, сатанистами. Бойся, мы идем! Гойда! Гойда!
Well, not only is that man, he's a madman, but it's not what it may seem, because look at this. This is coming from last night. Take a look.
Бойся! Мы идем! Гойда! Гойда! Бойся! Мы идем! Гойда!
Гойда! Помолчали.
Бойся!
That is the difference between Russian propaganda and Russian reality. That is, someone says this dude went full Goebbels. Yeah, I know. He went full Goebbels on this. I mean, he's even kind of got the look. But that is the reality of Russia versus the propaganda versus the reality there in Russia. I mean, this guy's going nuts, and they show, all these cheers and everything else, when in reality, it didn't happen.
Мы идем! Гойда! Гойда! Бойся! Мы идем! Гойда!
Гойда! Помолчали.
So obviously, it went well, huh? And in case you're wondering, it wasn't spontaneous. These were planned rallies. These were a planned event. In fact, just look at all of the buses in downtown Moscow after dropping off all of these people. They had to find people to bus them in for this event because not enough people would have shown up on their own independently. They are all paid to be there. Most of them are government employees as well as students that have been forced to go. Look at all these buses. Once again, this is downtown Moscow. These were the buses that were bringing in and then taking home all of those event goers that supposedly showed up for these huge crowds of events after the annexation calls in Russia. So, yes, it's a lie. It's an act. This is not actually happening. It's not going well. The war's not going well. The popularity is not going well. Mobilization obviously didn't go well. Mobilization, which was meant to mobilize 300,000 new men to fight this in this horrendous meat grinder of a war, only succeeded really in sending 200,000 people to flee the country into neighboring Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Finland. And the Russians can't even feed the troops that they did mobilize. As we can see here, the wives and mothers are bringing food for their men. They're not being fed by the army. The prices for helmets, tactical vests, and other essential items have skyrocketed since the mobilization, as many Russian troops were told that they needed to mobilize and they needed to purchase these items for themselves. Take a look.
Понизу, наверное. Коробки им перекинет.
As I'm sure if you're interested in the Ukraine war, like I am, then I'm sure you've seen plenty of photos. Like you have like Russian guys just looking at their rifles, like, what is this thing? Keep in mind, the guys that were supposed to have been mobilized are the ones that are veterans, and they're like reservists, like people with like military training already. So all these horrendous videos very much show that they're not. They're not actually what was meant to be mobilized. They're just getting bodies. They're getting as many bodies as they physically can from anybody. Mostly people that are they're sending people to the front that don't want to be there. And not just in a, oh, it's not my, I signed up for the military at some point and now it's my duty. No, it's people that were like protesting and they're being sent to the front lines. And that leads us down here and into the Middle East, where we have several other topics popping up today. First of all, in the West Bank of Israel and Palestine, Palestine being the West Bank specifically, a Palestinian teen was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces after he had pushed through a small hole in the Israeli separation barrier and began to throw objects at police here on today. So they ended up shooting and killing him after this teenager, being a teenager, busted a hole through the fence, crawled through it, started throwing objects at police. They shot and they killed him. And that is what's going on there in the West Bank of Palestine. Up in Erbil, the Iranians once again shelled Iraqi Kurdistan. Iranian forces shelled locations around Iraqi Kurdistan, including 6 locations around the city of Erbil, Iraq. You can see some of the footage coming out from here of that shelling ongoing. And in Baghdad today, more solderers protesting in Baghdad. The In Baghdad, the supporters of Muqtada al-Sadr are protesting again, who are now fighting the security forces of the Al-Jumaria bridge. The police are using tear gas, light and sound grenades, Molotov cocktails, and small arms. So far, everything is relatively peaceful, according to Iraqi concepts. There are several wounded on both sides. No one has yet reported any of the dead or anybody is dead. Yesterday, Sadrs came out to protest with weapons in Basra and some cities in the southern Mahafazas of Iraq. Also, last night, Sharia al-Salam militias burned down a number of headquarters of the rival parties and militias in the city of Nasiriyah. You can see some of these protests coming out here today. For those that don't know, Muqtada al-Sadr is a Shia cleric, and he is a Shia cleric that is Iranian-backed. Iran is mostly Shia, and then you have Saudi Arabia, which is to the south of Iraq, which is mostly Sunni. And Iran heavily backs Muqtada al-Sadr. He's very popular amongst the poor Shia populations inside of Iraq and inside of Baghdad. He's highly supported by groups such as Katiba Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-trained group. They are an insurgency force. He also leads what's known as the Peace Brigades, or Sadr's army, or the Mahdi army, depending on how you look at it, that actually fought against coalition forces during the invasion of Iraq as part of the insurgency, and is notorious for having killed many coalition troops inside of Baghdad and the surrounding areas. So that is Muqtada al-Sadr. He is not a very, generally speaking, not a very good guy. And he's constantly trying to overthrow the Iraqi government and trying to instill a Shia government there. Yes, he's Iranian-backed. He's not Iranian, he's Iranian-backed. Iran has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies throughout the Middle East as they're trying to expand their influence and control throughout the region. And over here in North Korea, we see that North Korea is conducting its fourth round of missile tests within 1 week. On Saturday, South Korea, Japan, and U.S. militaries said that they detected 2 North Korean missile launches. South Korea said the liftoffs occur from North Korea's capital region of Pyongyang. The North's multiple testing this week has seen a response of recent naval drills between South Korea and the United States and other training involved in Japan. According to the South Korean Japanese estimates, the missiles flew around 350 to 400 kilometers, 220 to 250 miles at a maximum altitude of 30 to 50 kilometers, or 20 to 30 miles, and they've landed in the waters between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. To Pyongyang now launching more missiles. If you want more information on that, you can check out AP News. Jump down here into Africa, where over here in Addis Ababa, we see, which is in Ethiopia. This is the headquarters of the African Union, which is basically a union of all of the African countries there. It's kind of like the EU for them, or kind of like a miniature UN for them, for those that may not understand how the EU works. And basically it's just a union of all the African countries there to get together and try to do diplomatic things together. And the African Union released a statement on the Burkina Faso coup, the military coup, which overthrew the government as of yesterday, and is the second military coup of just this year. Anyway, the African Union did officially release a statement regarding this, and they said that the chairperson of the African Union Commission unequivocally condemns the second takeover of power by force in Burkina Faso. Addis Ababa, 30th September 2022. In strong support of ECOWAS, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, H.E. Mazua Faki Mahamat, and the conformity of the Lome Declaration of the year 2000, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Government, and the Accra Declaration of Unconstitutional Changes of Government, and especially his deep concern about the resurgence of unconstitutional changes in the government in Burkina Faso and elsewhere on the African continent. Chairperson calls upon the military to immediately and totally refrain from any acts of violence or threats to the civilian population, civil liberties, human rights, and to restrict compliance with electoral deadlines for the restoration of the constitutional order by the 1st of July 2024 at the latest. The chairperson reaffirms the continued support of the African Union to the people of Burkina Faso to ensure peace, stability, and development of the country. And that is coming from the official Twitter of the African Union. A UN peacekeeper was killed in a rebel attack, according to MONUSCO, which is the official Twitter of the, which is the official operation for this region. UN peacekeeper was killed by the Tirwaneo rebel group in the Democratic Republic of the Congo at their base in Menebwe. We get that officially coming from the MONUSCO Twitter. And on to Burkina Faso, gunfire has been heard throughout Burkina Faso and its capital of Ouagadougou. One day after the coup protests and gunfire are heard on the street. This is once again the second military coup this year in Burkina Faso. You can see those protesters there in the street. Some of the scenes of chaos here. Attacking government buildings. And this is the statement immediately after the coup here, coming from the new commander of basically the military government here in Burkina Faso.
Décider ce qui suit. 1. Le lieutenant-colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba est démis de ses fonctions de président du MPSR. 2. Le capitaine Traoré Ibrahim est nommé président du MPSR pour compter de ce jour. Fait à Ouagadougou le 30 septembre 2022, signé le capitaine Traoré Ibrahim. Communiqué numéro 02, peuple du Burkina Faso.
So it goes on for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. He's basically announcing the military coup and that everyone is deposed and that constitution is dissolved and everything else. So, yeah, it's a military coup. Over here in Havana, Cuba, protests are going on, or currently ongoing throughout Cuba, following Hurricane Ian. Many are still without power there after Ian has left Cuba, and many went to the streets to protest due to the lack of electricity. Cuban authorities shut down the internet in response to prevent the spread of images of the demonstrations taking place across the island.
¡Qué emoción, Dios mío! No, en serio, derecho.
Libertad, 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 libertad.
And you can see them banging their pots and pans and cooking utensils there. And up in Canada, protests are ongoing across Canada, right now, protesters in the cities of Toronto and Montreal joined 130 other cities across the globe on Saturday, protesting against the killing of Mahsa Amini and against the Islamic Republic of Iran. They changed its slogans such as "Death to the Islamic Republic." So those are the protests ongoing in Canada. So there's a ton of stuff happening geopolitically throughout the world. We're talking about pretty big developments when it comes to Ukraine and the fighting ongoing there. We're seeing, of course, a coup in Burkina Faso. We're looking at what could possibly be a second Iranian revolution happening this year there in the country of Iran following the murder of Mahsa Amini. We're also seeing, of course, the protests by the Sodderists and, of course, the major fighting ongoing there inside of the country of Ukraine and some of the terrible catastrophes that have happened there. But that's actually everything that's been ongoing in the news over the past 24 hours since our last report last night. I hope that you guys at least found this knowledgeable, well, maybe not enjoyable, as a lot of this is kind of dark and depressing news. But don't worry, you guys can actually help. So if you guys go and check out the video description below, you're going to see a ton of different organizations down there. Please, please get back to them. And if you have more organizations, please jump out to our Discord and let us know and get in touch with a staff member and shoot us a link in the description. We'll go ahead and start vetting those organizations. We want to help as many people throughout the world. We don't believe in profiting off of other people's misery. We want to be the news that gives back. And the only way to do that is through you guys. So thank you very much for the support. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Let your friends know about us. Follow and share our stuff on social media. You can, of course, you can jump onto our Discord. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. The more people that come here and watch the news, the more good we'll be able to do overall. So please give you as much support as you can to the organizations below. And thank you for the support on the channel here, and I hope we continue to see you back. Our next report will be on Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, where we'll cover the last 48 hours worth of news. Please, I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe, and if not, I do hope that you guys find that safety and security in the very near future. My name is Paul from the New News, and everybody have a great night, a great rest of your weekend, and a nice, wonderful start to your week. And bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шверхуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріля до волновах, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом ідіть нахуй, тут працює працюєте. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.